Good evening. This is Brown at I've Brown. Tonight we are going to be talking about True Detective Season 3. So, True Detective was an anthology crime drama TV series that was created by Nick Pizzolatto, and each season told a different story with a different cast of characters. Season 3 focuses on Wayne Hayes, a retired detective who is sitting down with a producer of a true crime TV show and being interviewed by her in regards to a case he worked on back in 1980, in which he and his partner, Roland West, were called upon to investigate the disappearances of two children, a brother and sister, in West Finger, Arkansas. And it was a rather tragic and complicated case in that one of the children, the brother, was found dead, but the sister never turned up. And anytime that they thought that they may have found the perpetrator, or at least they might have been on the trail of the perpetrator, something would happen that would, basically derail the whole case. And the authorities that they worked for were certain that they caught their man on more than one occasion, which should really tell you something as far as, how eager they were for a scapegoat. But it turns out that in both cases, there was evidence showing that the person that they thought was the perpetrator was in fact not the guilty party. And so Hayes and West, they, kind of kept at this case over, a certain number of years, but eventually, West, went on to other things, but Hayes, though, it just kept nagging at him. It just kept gnawing at his, subconscious, and he would, keep on finding an excuse to look into the case, and he would take time off and try and map things out and try and figure out, hey, what are we missing, what did we miss back in 1980. And 1990 was when the case turned up again, and unfortunately there was a similarly tragic outcome in that certain people got caught in the crossfire that didn't need to get caught in the crossfire, and Hayes was no closer to solving the case for his own satisfaction, and the case, it was never closed in the back of his mind. And fast forward to 2015 when he's being interviewed by this producer, it's at a rather sad time in his life because his wife had died not too long ago, and at this point in time he's suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, and his memory, it's very fragmented at this point. But this case that he's never been able to solve, the missing girl, it's probably been one of the few things that's kept him motivated to go on living in life. He knows that his mind's shutting down. He knows that his memory's degrading, and he keeps getting haunted by the ghosts of his past, as well as being confused as to when certain things happened or who certain people are, and he keeps getting things mixed up. But he's always able to come back to the case. He's always able to leave messages for himself to try and look into things. But in the process of being interviewed by this producer, he starts to realize that he missed quite a bit in both in 1980 and in 1990. Both he and his partner, there were things that they hadn't stumbled upon or they hadn't found that have only come to light in around 2015. And so Hayes is in a spot where he wants to solve this case. He wants to find out what happened to the girl. And so he ends up digging into the past and looking up his old partner to see, if maybe they could rattle a few cages, or at the very least, lay some ghosts to rest. And so that's where I really feel like season 3 in some ways was kind of a return to form, in regards to how season 1 was, because season 1 it had a very distinct approach, and I think that's something that a lot of audiences really enjoyed. It was a very, it was crime drama and film noir with just a hint of, I guess you could say, the paranormal almost, but in season 2 it was just straight up crime drama and film noir. But season 3, it follows its own path. It follows the beat to its own drum, and it's a lot more similar to season 1 than season 2. But the supernatural is very much downplayed, and there's enough ambiguity to where there are certain instances where you can really easily chalk it up to either a vision that's being brought on by Hayes's dementia or Alzheimer's. But at the same time, though, considering that it's confirmed within the season that both the events in this season as well as the events in season 1 take place in the same world, and thereby you'll bring in the events in season 2 as well. There's a certain supernatural element that makes itself a possibility within the proceedings of this story. Now, granted, the supernatural element, as I said, is very much downplayed, and it's more just briefly brought in as this could be something paranormal, this could be something, or just could be something that a man whose memory is degrading is having to grapple with. And there's even a moment or two where Hayes is, as an old man, is looking back on his life, and he's able to remember moments where his younger self is, say, interacting with his family or something like that. And as he's watching them, he puts his hand on the bedroom door that he's watching them from, and the door starts to move. And then you then back in the past, the younger version of Hayes is looking up, and he's just as the door seems to be moving by itself. I mean, not like haunted house moving, but just like how doors just sometimes with air current, they'll just move a little bit by itself. It'll creak a little bit. It's something like that, where you could say that there's some sort of supernatural connection going on. In this case, maybe there's a bit of almost like time travel there, or more than likely, though, it's just a coincidence as far as the door just happened to move right when. See, now I'm thinking about time travel here, but yeah, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that the supernatural element is very much ambiguous, but I did appreciate how we got to see the perspective of someone who is trying to remember something that they were never able to have closure for, and they're just trying to check off that one last box on the list before they surrender to the whatever fate has in store for them. And Mahershala Ali, he does a fantastic job of playing Wayne Hayes, and one of the things that I really liked about this particular season is the makeup that's used on him to convey him as an old man is very well done. And if I hadn't have known that it was, what Mahershala Ali looked like already, I honestly thought that was him right as an old man right there. But then you see him as a younger man, in both in 1980 and in 1990. The hairstyle and some of the makeup as well, does a good job of showing him throughout the decades, and I was very impressed with that. And when Roland West, played by Stephen Dorff, comes back onto the scene in the series, when you see him as an old man, I mean, I thought that was even more well done in some ways, because there'd be moments where Mahershala Ali would look. I mean, the makeup on him would look better than the makeup on Stephen Dorff, but then there'd be scenes where it's kind of vice versa. But regardless, the people who did the makeup on those two guys did a phenomenal job, and both in terms of makeup as well as their physical performances, it really conveyed two old men. Or the actors did a really good job of portraying two old men when they had the makeup on. But also, even just the simple hairstyle changes, say back in when the story's supposed to take place in the 1990s or the 1980s, and they just did a really good job of showing not only these guys throughout the decades, but just how time changes, the surroundings, the people, and just did a really good job, kind of like they did in season 1 in that regard. I really liked the actress Carmen Ejogo. She plays Hayes' wife Amelia, and she was a school teacher who worked in West Finger, Arkansas, and she actually had one of the kids in her class, and she's already invested in trying to find the kids. But the tragedy of the case not only shakes the detectives, but also affects her too, as well as the town. But in her interactions with Hayes, though, the two of them, they eventually become a couple, and then they become husband and wife, and they have a family together. And I really like the chemistry between the two, because on one hand you could tell that the two of them really had each other's back, but at the same time, though, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, because I mean, Hayes, he would come into conflict with his wife sometimes because of stuff that's going on, due to work, his job, this case that, refuses to, be solved, so to speak. And you see the toll that it's taking on, him, and how he's unfortunately kind of lashing out at times at his wife and kids. And you kind of understand why he is being as harsh as he is, because, I mean, the case involves two missing children, and, when they have kids together, when he and his wife have kids together, I mean, it's a point where it's like, when the case comes back up, he's remembering that, that time in 1980, and the two missing kids, and so, he's even more protective of, the kids he has now. But at the same time, it's just this darkness that just, it's never really let go of him. And you could argue that, this darkness has kind of been with him, before the case, because, I mean, you're talking about, a guy who actually, his character served in Vietnam, and which, I mean, that was all sorts of trauma right there. And then, you factor in that he's an African American, working on the police force in 1980s Arkansas, and, probably had done so in the 70s as well. And so, you have to deal with, racism and things like that. So this is a guy who, he's got a lot on his shoulders. And so when you see him interacting with his wife, and Carmen Ijogo, I mean, she just does a really good job playing the part, because on one hand, she's very compassionate, and she's very nurturing, But at the same time, though, she has her limits. I mean, I phrase that. Her character has her limits. And I liked how Carmen Ejogo played that. How, she clearly loves, the man who, eventually becomes her husband. But at the same time, there are, points where she puts her foot down and says, you need to get your head out of your ass, pal. This is what's going on here, and you need to see the forest for the trees, so to speak. I really liked their relationship. I mean, sometimes it was sweet, sometimes it was, harsh, but at the same time, regardless of the flaws, they were always there for each other. And so, and also, I really liked Stephen Dorff as Roland West. And I mean, most people, myself included, probably remember him best as the bad guy from the first Blade movie with Wesley Snipes. Really good movie, check it out. But then, fast forward to seeing him here, I mean, the guy was phenomenal, okay? I mean, I knew he was a decent actor, but I didn't know he was as good of an actor as he was, when he came on to here as, the character of Roland West. I mean, because, he's a very different type of individual. He plays a very different type of individual in comparison to Wayne Hayes, in that, he's more of a by-the-book detective in some ways. I mean, he bends the rules at times, but at the same time, though, he also realizes that in order to have a, legitimate career in the police force, in order to be able to have a chance at actually solving crimes and doing, his job properly, there are times where he has to obey the chain of command, whether he likes it or not. And that's something that he and Wayne Hayes come into conflict on multiple occasions. Because they work well together, but there are times in which the chain of command, even though they both know the chain of command is wrong, they have differing philosophies on, okay, we need to keep on pushing, or hey, we need to sort of pull back a bit and come back and live to fight again another day. And that was more Roland West's approach. And the way Stephen Dorff played him, I mean, he didn't play that, as, say, like a coward or anything like that. He played it as more of a pragmatic, tough guy. Like, he knew when to, kick ass and take names, but he also knew when to, back off and say, yes, sir, that kind of thing. And you see how his character really had a strong friendship with Hayes, and how he tried to go to bat for Hayes on multiple occasions, but because Hayes refused to let this case go, any goodwill and favors that Roland tried to call in for Hayes, they just were kind of thrown back in Roland's face. And so there's a certain amount of bitterness there that, I mean, on one hand, West definitely wanted to try and solve the case, and for the missing girl's sake, as well as for the family's sake, because he actually becomes friends with the father of the missing girl. But at the same time, though, there are moments where he feels like the case either is closed or it's never really going to be solved, and hey, we need to move on to other things here. But because of certain events that happen within the season, though, within the story, he and Hayes have a major falling out. And so you see that there's like a certain amount of bitterness with his character that in a lot of ways is understandable, but it's kind of tragic considering that these two were at one point really good friends. And so it's really fascinating, watching, them go from, point A to point B, and then later on, in their later years, they start to sort of patch things up again, but at the same time they're still scarred by the case. And the irony there is, Roland West, Stephen Dorff just does a really good job. He plays him, especially like in the later years when he's having to listen to Hayes come back into his life and plead with him to try and solve the case one last time, and he has to sort of swallow his pride and just hear his friend out, because he realizes his friend, his mind is not what it once was. It's gradually breaking down, and so he doesn't want to do it, but at the same time he wants to try and help his friend one last time, except he also wants to be in his friend's life again, because he realizes that someone needs to watch his back. Even though he already has his family and stuff, he wants to be there to help his friend if he can. So I liked how Stephen Dorff just played that character who went from, I guess you could say, true, he was basically just a truly good friend. And even though he had a certain amount of resentment towards Hayes, I just like how he eventually comes back and helps him out when his friend needs it the most. So Stephen Dorff just does a really good job in the part. And he and Mahershala Ali, they have really good chemistry together, and you really believe that their characters are partners and that they've got a history together. And I should mention that Mahershala Ali, I've touched on it already, but I just want to emphasize how good of an actor Mahershala Ali is, particularly in this role, because he goes from he portrays the same character but throughout different decades, and it's more than just makeup and hairstyling that conveys the character's transition throughout time. And he just does a really good job of portraying that character who is just haunted by what he's been through and what he can't solve. And to make matters worse, he's even haunted by the ghosts of his past, due to his dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's just seeing him playing an old man at that point, shouting at the figments of his imagination. It's kind of heartbreaking, really. And it's just it kind of hit home for me, because I've read up on people who are essentially going through similar type of situations, and it was really sad, but it felt authentic though. So basically, all three, Mahershala Ali, Carmen Ejogo, and Stephen Dorff, they all do great jobs, and as the principal characters. Also, I just wanted to give props to Scoot McNairy. He plays the character of Tom Purcell, the father of the two missing kids, and his character, was very. You really felt sorry for the guy, because he's trapped in a loveless marriage. His wife, is constantly, cheating on him, and basically the only reason the two of them got married was because she was pregnant, and he didn't want to be a douchebag and leave her with with kids on her own. And so the two of them, they hate each other's guts, but they got married for the kids. And you get the idea that of the two of them, he was the one who cared more for the kids than she did. And but unfortunately though, he just this case, it devastates him, obviously, because one of his children's dead, and the other's missing and may or may not still be alive. But you also see how it just changes him through the years, because Roland West actually comes in to help him out a few times. And so the guy was an alcoholic, and even before his kids went missing, you find out that there was he was coping with by consuming alcohol, and it was really hurting he was hurting himself by trying to cope this way. But thankfully Roland was able to help him out, and you see how he's sort of cleaned himself up later on, but then once this case comes back, just all these demons just come back. And so it's not just the detectives who are being haunted by this, it's the people around the case. But anyway, though, yeah, so Scoot McNairy, he does a really good job playing just this pathetic, devastated father. And I'm not sure if I've seen him in anything, but I was very impressed with how well he performed here. And also there was an actor named Michael Greyeyes, a Native American actor, and he plays a guy named Brett Woodard, who is the initial suspect of the disappearance of the missing kids. But this being the type of show that it is, it's semi spoiler. He's not the guy who did it. He's not the guy who kidnapped the kids. But because of he's a very damaged individual. Like Detective Hayes, he was a Vietnam veteran, but unlike Hayes, he wasn't able to really come back into the world, and so he's a very damaged individual, and he's trying to salvage a living by picking up scrap and things like that. But the locals in the area, they automatically just latch onto him as a suspect, and so his arc was very tragic. And it was one of those deals where, I said earlier that a lot of people got hurt or got killed that didn't have to get hurt or killed in this case, and he was one of them. But yeah, Michael Greyeyes, though, he does a really good job playing the part as a guy who just tried to come back into the world but couldn't fit back in, and because of all the stuff he'd been through over in Vietnam. He lost his wife and kids left him, and it just he just didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to function, as someone who in a non-combat situation, he didn't know how to live in the world. So it was a very tragic character, and his fate was very tragic as well. But so yeah, just some really good characters, really good actors playing them. And I also I really liked how the story touched upon certain things that were very prevalent at the time. Like there was racism that was going on at the time. There was all these other things that were going on, like government political campaigns and things like that you kind of find out that people who were involved in stuff like that, it just you realize how much red tape went into I guess making things difficult for people who were actually trying to do their jobs correctly. And it's stuff like that that's still going on today, unfortunately. But yeah, so this was a really good season of True Detective, and I really enjoyed watching it. And I'm hoping that this isn't the final season of the show, because each of the seasons I've really enjoyed so far, but I think that this one, for me at least, I feel like this one is probably the most relatable in a lot of ways, because I mean, all the characters in the seasons prior, I mean, they were believable in their own ways, but here though, I think that they feel like the most believable that I've seen them so far. I mean, a big part of that just could be, I mean, the very relatable, I guess, development of one of the main characters, eventually having dementia or Alzheimer's, and because I mean that's something that a lot of people contend with, and I mean I know some people who are going through stuff like that right now, so I mean stuff like that kind of hits home with me, but I mean that could be one of the reasons why I found this particular season to be probably the most relatable of the 3 seasons so far. And plus, I mean, you have, the relationships of the main characters being probably the most organic that I've seen. But I'm going to go ahead and give season 3 of True Detective 5 stars out of 5. It was excellent. And even though it's the 3rd season of the series, you don't necessarily have to have watched seasons 1 and 2 in order to fully appreciate season 3. But at the very least, I would say, I mean, obviously, I would say check out, both seasons 1 and 2, as well as season 3. I mean, just because I personally enjoyed all 3 seasons, but it might help just a little bit if you watched season 1 at the very least before season 3, because there's a brief little shout out, that confirms that at the very least season 3 and season 1, take place in the same universe. I mean, as I said earlier, I choose to believe that season 2 is in there as well, but there's a specific moment where they reference the case that the main characters in season 1 were working on, and it shows the pictures of the 2 main characters from season 1. So anyway, though, regardless of whether you choose to watch the prior seasons before this one, or you just want to go view this as a standalone, I mean, it's a really excellent season. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review, and I really hope you all enjoyed it. And if y'all got any questions, comments, let me know. And feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, and hope you all have a good night. Bye.